Hi, my name is Raleigh Wilkins, and I'm glad that you joined us today. I'll be your lead instructor as we explore the topic, setting effective sales targets for sales leadership teams. This is an important target, and I should know, I spent over 25 years leading and developing sales teams at companies from startups through Fortune 100. And I know how challenging it can be and when you sit down in Q4 and start planning out for the coming year. In this short overview, we're going to take an overview look at all the factors to take into account when you're setting up your sales quotas. We're not going to be able to go deep on every area today, but we are going to go really deep on one area that's critical, which is how to calculate the impact of Salesforce attrition on your top line sales goals so that you can build that number into your sales goal. But we're also going to take a step back and take a look at a number of different topics related to sales planning and the things that you need to be aware of as you start to create your plan this year. So let's go ahead and jump right in. It's always helpful when you start a presentation and know a little bit more about the person who's presenting. I can't tell you how many times I've been approached by people on LinkedIn or so-called experts who had a year or two of experience and then spent the next 5 years trying to teach me how they did what they did for a year. If you haven't failed the way I failed over 25 years and you've never been able to succeed. And so before we get started, I just want to take a moment, if you'll indulge me, and tell you a little bit about myself. So who is Raleigh Wilkins? Who am I? Well, across 25 years of experience, I've been at companies such as NASDAQ, Alere, MarketWired, Elsevier, Opron, T-Mobile, in roles from account executive through senior vice president of sales. But before that, I served 6 years in the United States Marine Corps, where I learned the fundamentals of leadership and leadership development. I can tell you that those early years formulated in the military certainly shaped my experience. And they're going to be imparted as the things that we talk about as we go across our next hour here together. But most importantly, it's going to be the failures that I had and the lessons that I learned as an early career sales manager when I sat down and put my name to numbers that I didn't yet know if I could succeed. And as I moved past that initial first sales manager role into sales director roles and VPs of sales, I made sure to keep those lessons front of mind. And so I want to impart those on you, that these are lessons are learned over the course of time, that I may not be the expert on everything that there is to do with sales, but I certainly have experience that I want to impart on you today. And if you're sitting down to do your sales quotas, there's things that we're going to really want to take a deep dive into. And whether you're a manager, a director, a VP of sales, or even a sales rep who's just trying to get a leg up and understand how leadership makes decisions, this video should be extremely impactful for you, because it's not as simple as saying last year we did $1 million in sales and this year we want to do $2 million in sales. There's a lot more that goes into that planning process. And so we're going to overview that now. Some of the goals that we go through, I use the same methodology that we used in the Marine Corps. It's called TLO and ELO methodology. TLO is a terminal learning objective. That's knowledge for the sake of knowledge. But enabled learning objective is the more important part. And that's what are you going to be able to do with this knowledge once you learn it. So the top 4 objectives for the course are here. We want to understand what the core challenges are as you head into your annual target. So what are they going to be? What are some of the things to be aware of? How about the relationships that you're going to need to know between things like the goals that you set, drive the targets that you create, and the metrics that you need to evaluate at the time of year that you're going to do it? These are all extremely important concepts to understand, and we're going to overview them here. We're also going to make sure that we define the key terms, understand the impact that we can have from incremental changes. So changing a comp plan one direction to another can make a huge impact on your ability to deliver results. And finally, we're going to understand the impact of sales team attrition on your top line sales quota. This was a critical piece that I missed really early in my career. And so while we can't go deep on every aspect today, we're going to go pretty deep on that one. The outcomes, what should you be able to do after doing this course? You should be able to participate more fully in those roundtable discussions with executive teams. Whether that's on your annual planning or in your quarterly business review or your monthly business review, you're going to have the nomenclature and vernacular to be able to do that. You're going to be able to create a 360 approach to your sales quota target and planning, so that you're not going to think in terms of just revenue production, but also all the tools that you're going to need in place to support that. And how do you create an effective sales team strategy? We're not going to take a deep dive today into territory planning or in the metrics that you're going to need to use, but we are going to take a deep dive into calculating the impact of attrition on your sales team's goals. We're going to spend probably 20 minutes doing that. I'm going to review tools for you. And at the end of this, I'm going to give you an attrition calculator that you can use online. And then there's going to be links throughout this presentation where you can link back with me. And if you've watched this video, I'll give you a free 30-minute consult while I'll walk through your numbers with you so that as you go into planning, you don't do what I did and take bad deals. Okay, so let's get into the nature of the problem. And the nature of the problem is if we have misaligned targets and we have misaligned goals, I'm going to have a really hard time trying to hit my sales targets. Now let's take a step back here for a second and think about sales as a whole. So sales is pretty simple, right? If you've been in sales more than 5 minutes, you know it's not as simple as this diagram makes it look, any more than if you've ever gone to an archery range, how difficult it can be to notch an arrow and loose it down range and hit that target. But the truth is, it's really not all that complicated when you first start out. Sales is fairly simple. You have an archer, which in this case is our salesperson. We have an arrow, which is our message. And we have a target, which is our customer and the customer base that we want to reach. So when we first start out, if you're an early career company or early career stage growth, it's a really simple process. You've got a compelling value proposition. You need to get customers on the phone in order to tell them about it. Once you go through a compelling demo and the price is good and a return on investment for them, you'll be able to close that deal. And so based on that, you'll start to set up good patterns for yourself, but it gets really complicated as you start to grow. So if you're going to keep a small business and you have a limited number of clients and you have a very unique product, then this presentation is probably not for you. But if you've got a more complex problem, or you've got a more complex product and you're trying to learn how do you set those goals effectively, then this is definitely going to work for you. And you're going to resonate on some of these next slides. So what are some of the challenges that can happen? Well, one of the first things that happen is the shifting landscape. What do I mean by that? Well, as you start to grow your team, you don't just have one person who's in charge of revenue. You have sales, marketing, product, operations, and they all have competing goals. The product's life cycle can come to an end. I mean, if you don't believe that, just think about Blockbuster. Blockbuster was one of those companies that was up and coming for many years, and it was everyone else's job to try to emulate what they did. But then everybody moved online in the digital marketplace, and they stayed in bricks and mortar stores. And now I think there's one Blockbuster store left in the entire face of the planet. Everybody else is online. So that shifting landscape can change the way that you need to change your sales pitch. And why are we talking about sales pitches if we're talking about quota? Hold on a minute, because it's going to make a lot more sense. All those different targets start to happen and occur as well. So what are those concurrent targets? Well, again, when I first started in sales, it was pretty easy. I had one target and that goal was to go get new customers. But what happens when I have the client? How do I renew them? I'm still chasing new logos, but what happens when we get new products? Do I upsell the current clients or do I take that product to a new person? What about the customers that we had but we lost? How do I win those back? See, all of those are going to end up going into your sales strategy, and that means they're going to end up going into your targets, and they're going to end up going into what you're trying to accomplish for the year. The next thing that we look at is the changing buyer and the changing criteria. We touched on this a little bit with Blockbuster. I'm not going to go too deep into this today, but it is important to understand that the type of customers that you're going to need to attract is going to determine the type of sales rep that you need to have, which is going to determine the type of compensation plan that you need to have. And that life cycle is going to determine the sales quotas that you can set. So it gets pretty complicated, but right now we're just introducing concepts. And then finally, the complexity that happens is from the selling process. So when you first start out, you have a 3-step sales process: present, demo, and close. But as you go further in your sales product evolution, you're going to end up with a lot of different sales cycles. And you're going to have to go through renewals, upsells. You're going to have to do more with a discovery and pre-discovery. You're going to have to spend more time in demo, multiple decision makers. It'll get more and more complex the longer that we go on. And so it's critically important that as you start to build your sales plan, you also start to stay in touch with your executive team and what they're doing so that you can align your sales goals behind them. Now back to us as sales leaders. What's the challenge? The challenge that we have is when we have multiple targets, all of a sudden the goals change, and those actions that we were doing that made sense and they hit the goal out of the park to begin with, all of a sudden they start to fail. And you see our little target here is our guide. Before we were center massed 5 out of 5, and we're starting to drift out and we're not hitting 5 out of 5 anymore. And pretty soon, if we just double down on our existing repertoire of skills and what we were doing in order to hit our sales goals, we're not going to be hitting it all. And the challenge there is that we're going to end up hitting a stall point. And that means that we've stopped growing. and everybody's busy and everybody's out chasing logos and everybody on the team is executing. But what in the world happened? The devastating consequences of a sales stall have been documented by Harvard Business Review for years. And these are some of the shocking statistics that you need to be aware of if you're a sales leader. 87% of companies are going to hit a sales stalls. But when they did the regression analysis and the after action reports, they found that over 90% of them were caused by internal, not external roles, meaning that something failed internally. Half of those companies didn't live to see another day. And of those that did, had a 74% loss in valuation. Try trying to get money in a seed round when you've lost your valuation because you stopped growing. If you're a CEO and you've been in a startup environment, or if you're a mid-market company learning and trying to become a large enterprise, you know exactly what I'm talking about. And the challenge is, because we're in sales, a fifth grader with a calculator can look at a chalkboard and see how we're doing. And we invariably become the target. And when we become the target, we don't have a very long life expectancy. The average VP of sales today in the commercial market has an 18-month average tenure. Why is that? Number one reason, failure to hit our top line sales goals. That can be extremely challenging because we're the people that actually created our goals. So how is it that we're going into planning right now and you're setting your sales goals up and yet you're not going to be in a position to be able to hit them? There's a common misconception that goes into sales planning, and that is that sales results are driven by metrics and process, and that the formula of success, once set, doesn't change. And the great salespeople, well, they can sell any product at any time to anyone. But we in sales, and in commercial sales in particular, know that's not true. Hard-won lessons tell us that sales results aren't driven by metrics and processes, but by aligned metrics and processes. And that as markets evolve, the formula shifts. And as that formula shifts, we can have misaligned rep profiles that cause churn, not only for our customers, but attrition on our teams. And that attrition is one of the hallmarks of things we're going to talk about today. This final slide I put in, and I know it breaks every rule of PowerPoint, but the idea here is to illustrate that sales is simple, but it's not easy. And when you think about target acquisition as something as simple as archery, there's over 18 different things that archer needs to know in order to execute a well-placed shot. And when you look at some of these things, it's the strategy, the enablement, the operations, but simple things like, did we define a target? Or has the shooter demonstrated proficiency in the tools? Or do we even provide training on how to use the bow and arrow? Do we have a system to coach the shooter when they fall behind? Has all the information about the target, the weather, been available to the shooter? And then there's a reasonable time allocated for them to be able to hit their objective. See, there's a lot that goes into archery and there's a lot that goes into selling. And so the next thing that we're going to talk about is effective annual target planning, so we can have one team and one goal. As we go into our annual target planning and we want to set one team, one goal, we sit in our executive roundtable and we're going to go do an offsite and we're going to start thinking about some of the things that I talked about earlier. And if all you heard was the first few minutes of this presentation, then you'd already be well ahead of most of the people that I've worked with. But following what we're going to go over is all of the things that we need to now consider understanding the complexity of the sales cycle that we're in. The first thing that we'll do as we go into annual sales planning is we're going to ask ourselves three questions. Hey, are we growing? How about the rate of growth? Are we growing as fast as we want to and as fast as we could be? And if so, how do we sustain that growth? And they're the three P's that we need to be aware of: the people, the process, and the product. And from the people, there's a number of questions that we'll want to ask in this executive retreat. Do we have the right team? Do we have the right people? Are we incentivizing them the right way? Do we need to train them differently? How about our sales structure based upon the goals that we're setting? Is our framework still relevant? Maybe we started with value setting, but now we need to go to medic. Do we have the right enablement tools? Maybe we need to start adopting some tools like Commercial Tribe or Mind Tickle or Gong, or particularly we need to hire a sales trainer. And what about our product? Has our value proposition shifted? Are we going to come blockbuster? Do we have aligned messaging? Are our reps using that messaging? And then again with training, do we have an aligned messaging between marketing and sales? Now, all this is important because anything that we do to shift, we have to account for when we sit down to do our annual planning. And as we get into our annual planning, one of the things we need to do is assess our reps. And so as we look at our reps and we look at our teams, one of the things that we need to know is what are the things and what competencies and skills do we need to actually have? And if I looked across the gamut, across all the different skills that a sales rep, a sales manager, a marketing team could have, some of them are going to have high impact and we're good at them. Some of those we're not going to be good at, but you know what? It doesn't really matter. Some things we're good at, we like doing, but they don't have any impact on our sales goals. But what we really need to be aware of is those things in our makeup and in our assessment and in our organizational alignment that we're not good at, but are going to have a high impact on our team. And as we go into this, in these next few slides are going to be critical to pay attention to, because this is really the root of when we're going into our planning from a strategic point of view. The goals that we set are going to be driven by the outcomes that we want to have. So if we set a sales goal and grow $15 million this year, that's great. But what type of goal is that? Is that a net sales goal? Is that a gross sales? Is it gross margin? Is it net new customers? Are we going to do it through pipeline growth? Do we want to increase our bottom line or our top line? Is profit important? How are we going to go get those number of new customers? See, all these questions are going to drive and determine the structure that we have. And the structure that we have is going to determine the goals that we have. So we need to be very clear about what goals we're setting and why. I've been a part of companies throughout my tenure where we've had misaligned goals. And this is a place where we really end up in trouble. I was SVP at a company where we were a $40 million company and the goal was to grow sales by 20%. But yet what we didn't do is realize that we also needed to preserve our revenue because our net margin for error was very small. Yet we had a compensation plan in line that was misaligned and we were still rating our reps on top line sales goal. That's a challenge. And even when we had those goals aligned where we had a profit goal, we didn't have the product training for our reps to be able to support those. And then even when we had that, we didn't have the right alignment in the market and we didn't have the right structure of the goals. So that we had reps that had been there for 15 years in the organization that were account managers and enterprise account managers that didn't have any rules of engagement around accounts. So new reps didn't have any accounts they could sell. So there was a lot of complexity that happened when we sat down and did our annual planning. And we did a pretty good job of addressing it. But these are the types of things we have to be aware of. So remember first, the goals you set are going to influence the structure that's required. The number of sales reps, you might need more or less sales reps. The type of sales roles. Before we might have had account executives only, but now we need to explore account managers. And if we do add new roles, we need to change about the roles of engagement, because how are we going to hand counts off between those two? How do we structure commission and incentives? What type of sales training do we need to have? How about that selling framework and methodology we touched on earlier? Do we have the right one? When we look at our total addressable market, are we structuring our reps in the right way? Should we be tiering our accounts in a different way? So we have enterprise account, mid-market, and small accounts. And how do we identify them? How about tools from CRM to AI? Do we need to explore them? Do we need to embed them within our structure? And then finally, how are we going to report on this? Business reviews, annual business reviews, structure. These are all important components that are going to go into our annual planning. The reports that we use will be the things that we pull based upon the first two things that we do. So we'll pull reports like profit or sales growth. How do we do on discounting? How are we doing net new clients year over year? How about our total sales employee headcount? That's also going to be really important. See, the activities that we monitor, whether that's a sales metrics, field trip reports, CRM compliance, pipeline growth, forecasting accuracy, all these activities that we monitor, they only have merit if they're tied back to things that are going to drive the needle forward on what our overall company goals are. And those company goals are going to directly shape the way that we impact our sales targets. And our sales targets need to be driven in a realistic way. And finally, the incentives and trainings that we deploy. The incentives and trainings that we deploy, whether it's the review of cadences or the training we give and spiffs and the promotion pathing and the rest of that, all are going to be a byproduct of the goals that we set. Now, as we go into our planning, there's a lot that goes into it. And in subsequent modules and other trainings, we'll go into those. How do you define total addressable market? How do you actually get into the nuts and bolts of sales planning? So that when you're looking with your quarterly or monthly, how do I look at the number of selling days in the month and the average spend and get rid of the myth of seasonality and the idea that sometimes that rep vacations drive productivity and non-productivity, and all of that needs to go into it. And each one of those we can do modules on, and we will in subsequent. But for today, the main thing we want to overview is that there is a lot that needs to go into the strategy and the structure as you start to set your annual targets. And it goes well beyond whatever top line sales goal you want to hit, because anybody can put a number on a spreadsheet, but making that number on the spreadsheet actually translate into something that's useful and worthwhile and that we can deliver on is the essence of sales leadership. And so one of those things that's going to get in your way, and one of the things that I absolutely forgot about as I did my sales trainings, and I did my sales trainings as I did my sales projections, was the high cost of low retention. And this is a critical point that I want to pause on and repause on, that losing sales headcount is natural. It's something that you need to have in your team. Healthy teams have all types of sales attrition. And so when you think about sales attrition and the type of sales attrition that occurs on the team, then one of the things that we need to think about is, how do we get ahead of that? How do I backfill quickly? And even more importantly, as we sit down and do our annual planning, how do I know what that number is? Because I can tell you that when sales attrition occurs and there's open headcount, the sales manager has to step in to fill that gap. And the average sales manager today is covering 1.5 to 2 times the quota of an account executive on their team. And when they do that, the challenge is it becomes a law of diminishing returns, because they're getting paid in order to get other people to quota. But when they start carrying a quota, when you're a player coach, Jim Delaney, former CEO at MarketWired and a coach of mine, once remarked to me, he said, Raleigh, you can either play or you can coach, but you can't do both at the same time, because you can't see the field when you're throwing the ball, and you can't see what's happening if you can't look at the tape. And we need our sales managers to be focused on deal coaching and rep development, and we need to get them out of the game of closing 1.5 to 2 times. So how do we get ahead of this attrition? How do we plan for it? How do we goal accordingly? Because if we're going to have a gap, and I guarantee you, most of you listening to this do, you're going to need to account for that next year, so that we can either give over assignment to our frontline sales reps, or we can start to build on realistic goals or spiffs or targets or commission plans in order to incentivize our reps to performance. So why is it that sales roles are different than other roles when it comes to turnover? Well, one of the reasons is that we have, in no other role in corporate America does a rep or any employee so early in their career have such a direct impact on the top line sales goal. If you think about it, if you hire in a developer or a coder or an admin or an accountant, and they come into the organization, the benefit is within a day or a week, you know whether they can do their job or not. Challenge with sales is it might take you up to 3 to 6 months to find out if a sales rep can actually produce. But when they don't produce, whether it's the accountant or the IT person or HR or finance or someone in production and operation, when they don't produce, yeah, it hurts, but it doesn't hurt to the term of the quota. So the average account executive today carries a quota of $50,000 a month. That's just turnover, software as a service, churn and burn, account executive, average B2B sales. So every month that they're gone costs the company $50,000. So turnover costs a lot of money. Now, especially in these early career sales roles, these are the ones where we really have to be aware, because we expect to have turnover in these roles. And there's really 3 ways that it happens. The first is voluntary separation. You know, somebody comes into your company, you spend a year or 2 coaching them up, and then they go across the street to go work for another organization to make $10,000 more because you didn't have a promotion path. This is a reality of the sales game for us in sales management. It's one of the reasons to have promotion paths in place. I'm going to give you at the end of this presentation a very quick overview on a number of tools that I use and that we're going to have subsequent trainings on. But for today, just keep in mind that voluntary separation is going to occur. Of course, there's involuntary separation. Involuntary separation, you hire sales reps, early career with a couple of years experience. The challenge is there's no universally recognized sales credential or degree. If you tell me you have a degree in chemistry, I know what that means. If you tell me you have a degree in sales, you might as well tell me you learned how to box by watching Rocky. It doesn't mean a whole lot to me. And so that makes it extremely challenging to predict success. As a matter of fact, 1 in 5 fail. And then finally, the piece that I always forgot to put in there is internal promotion. If you have an early career sales team or any sales team, you want it to be a bench of talent for the rest of the organization. You want people from your team to be pulled out in order to give in cush jobs or great jobs in other parts of the organization. So someone going into sales operations or sales finance or whatever it's going to be, or they're just going to become an account executive, becomes a manager. Either way though, the challenge is once they leave your team, guess who inherits that quota? The frontline sales manager. And guess who almost always forgets to account for that? Guys like me who sat down in order to create the sales quotas in the first place. And so one of the shocking statistics that I learned was that in early career sales talent, roughly half of college graduates go into some type of revenue role, whether it's a BDR role, some type of marketing production role, account executive sales role. But after 2 years, of those 50%, only 10% remain. So who bears the cost for that again? We do. As we talked about, it's not an easy role to fill, and there's a lot of reasons for that. One is that we have a rolling annual attrition rate generally of 25 to 40% of our team, meaning on a sales team of 10 to 12 people, we're going to lose 2 to 4 people every year. And you may say, whoa, I don't lose 2 to 4 people a year because I fire them. You might not, but I guarantee you lose 1 or 2 people to leave your organization because either retire out, move on, or they make a decision to go to another part of the company. The other thing is certain times a year, it's really hard to find sales talent. Yeah, early career sales talent from May to maybe September, it's easy. They're graduating college, you can pick them up there. Beginning of the year, you may pick a few people up who were just leaving for the annual bonus of their other company. But on average, it takes 60 to 90 days from the second that somebody goes on a performance plan or turns in their resignation until you have somebody in seat. And then once you do have somebody in seat, it takes them up to 9 months in order to ramp. So nobody comes in day one and sells $50,000 in product. When I was director of sales at MarketWired, it took on average 9 months for a rep of ours to go from $0 to consistent productivity at $50,000 a month. Now they may hit it earlier, and we certainly goaled them earlier at 6 months, but the reality is that not every rep did that. And so I had to bake 9 months into my ramp time for productivity. And then finally, it's not a matter of getting applications to the role, but sorting through them. Over 300 applications per role is what I was on and usually getting. And yet the challenge that I had with that was I didn't know which one of those could actually do the role. We've touched on that earlier. So when I'm sitting down to calculate the attrition rate, I need to know a few things. The first thing that I need to know is I need to understand and calculate my company's rolling attrition rate. So you can reach out to HR for this if you don't know and you're new, or you can reach out to your sales leadership team if you're a senior leader and find out how many people they lost on their team this year or last year. But you want to do it as a rolling 12-month average. And so you may, if most of us know how to do that, you may want to Google it if not, but it's instead of just being a flat 12 months, it's an average over 12 months because it's either going to trend up or down. The second thing you need to know is the time the position remains open in terms of weeks and months. This isn't the, oh, I think this needs to be a number that you know, and your HR can help with this. But think about from the time that you know you need to backfill this position until the time you have a qualified candidate trained in NC, meaning they're through onboarding. So that can be a long period of time. And then finally, once they're on board and they're in your fleet and they're out there selling, how long does it take that individual to become productive? Those are all important considerations as we go through this. So I'm going to give you an example here of a typical sales rep quota. And I'm going to tell you a deal that I took one time. So I was at MarketWired, this back then. I had 12 account executives on my team budgeted. And if you know your frontline sales manager, generally speaking, you never have fully 12, but we actually did. You generally have 1 to 2 open headcount. You have 2 to 3 that are on plan. You have 2 or 3 high performers and the rest in the middle. We had a target of $50,000 a month. So annually that came up to $600,000 per year, or a $7.2 million target for our team of 12. Now I had a manager at the time, a VP of sales, and he said, Raleigh, look, I like to build manager over assignment in or sales buffer in for my managers because you're going to lose people. You're going to have attrition. You know, you need to be prepared for that. So I'm going to give you a 5% buffer. So on a $7.2 million quota, that meant I only had to set $6.8 million in order to hit my top line sales goal. That's a pretty good deal. And I was really excited about it. I took that deal. But was that $350,000 buffer enough now knowing what we know about sales attrition? Well, we're going to find out.